So let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'm delighted that you have joined us for this important conversation about building a clean and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 crisis in support of climate action and the Sustainable Development Goals. This event is organized in conjunction with the 2020 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development that is taking place this week. I am Helen Mountford. I'm Vice President for Climate and Economics at World Resources Institute, and I'm delighted to be moderating this event. World Resources Institute has the great privilege of co-hosting it together with the United Kingdom mission to the UN, along with the countries and organizations represented here today, including Bangladesh, Korea, Jamaica, Rwanda, and Sustainable Energy for All. On behalf of all the co-organizers today, welcome to this session and this discussion. So why are we here today? As of this moment, over 11 million people have contracted the coronavirus and over 500,000 have lost their lives. The loss of human life is absolutely heartbreaking and unfortunately set to continue ticking upwards. The pandemic has also taken a terrible toll on countries' economies. The majority of countries are on the brink of recession. Millions of people are out of work and businesses are struggling, especially small businesses. It's estimated that 70 to 100 million more people could be pushed into extreme poverty this year, erasing a lot of the progress that we've made over the last 3 years in terms of development goals. And of course, the disparities in who is most at risk from the disease and the impacts have exposed and exacerbated our existing economic and racial inequalities. And as COVID-19 continues to rage, we also have the climate crisis continuing to worsen as well. We are now confronted with a choice. As countries look to reboot their economies following the COVID pandemic, will they double down on the unequal, polluting, congested, and inefficient economies of the past? Or will countries choose to build back better in a way that protects their citizens, delivers jobs, and offers a stronger, more inclusive, low carbon economy growth path that is also more resilient to future shocks? Of course, the answer seems clear when you put it that way, and it is clear to many, including most of our panelists here today. The COVID-19 and climate crises are monumental challenges, but they must be addressed together through the prism of sustainable and resilient development. Governments must use all the tools in their toolbox, including the Sustainable Development Goals, their national climate commitments under the Paris Agreement, and their long-term climate strategies to build safer, more resilient, and more inclusive societies that leave no one behind. How we tackle the COVID-19 and climate crisis in tandem is the topic of that our distinguished speakers will be grappling with today on this panel. And they will be sharing some of the early insights from their own countries as they look to build back better from the pandemic and from their own institutions. We have a truly fantastic lineup this morning, and I would like to briefly introduce them all. First, we have the Right Honourable Lord Zach Goldsmith, Minister of the Environment for the United Kingdom, and a special thanks to the UK as being the lead host for the discussions today. And we have Mr. Shahab Uddin, Honourable Minister, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change for Bangladesh. We have Mr. Kyong Chung, the Director General for Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Scientific Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Republic of Korea. We have Ambassador Valentine Rugwabiza, Permanent Representative of Rwanda to the UN. We have Ambassador E. Courtney Rattray, Permanent Representative of Jamaica to the UN. And we have Damilola Ogunbiyi, CEO of the Sustainable Energy for All Initiative and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General and Co-Chair of UN Energy. So welcome to all of our wonderful panelists and to everyone who's joining us here today for this session. The way we'll organize this session is we'll start, first of all, with a little bit of a question to all of you, all those who are participating and engaging with us. We've got 3 questions we want you to answer on your perspective on a clean and resilient recovery. Following that, we will move into a discussion with each of the panelists. I've got questions lined up for each of them. And then we will continue with some question and answers for the full participants. So if you have any questions for the speakers as we go through, please do submit them in through the chat function, and we will raise some of those at the end for the participants. So first, let's start with a question for yourselves. If you would be so kind, please pull out your phones and go to www.menti.com and enter the code 950216. Once you have that code put in, you should make it to a screen that says, please stand by. If you can tap the heart function, the heart symbol on that screen, we will know that you are ready. All right, let's begin with the first question. So the first question is COVID-19, first of all, has been described as really a once in a generation or once in a century chance to press the reset button and pursue a future that is more inclusive, it's stronger and resilient. The pandemic has also been described as sapping limited resources and attention from tackling the climate crisis. So our question to all participants is, how do you see it? Is COVID-19 recovery more of an opportunity or a risk for advancing climate action? I'll let you put in your views. We're starting to see some coming through. And it looks like most of those responding are moving towards the opportunity side. The recovery can be a real opportunity for tackling climate action, but it's still somewhere in the middle. We have a scale of 1 to 5, and at the moment we're 3.6 towards the opportunity side. Okay, so it's an opportunity, but perhaps not quite realized fully yet. Let's go to our second question for all participants. So for which sector are you most concerned that Brown stimulus investments could lock in high levels of carbon emissions for decades to come? Which are the ones that you think are most at risk for lock-in of emissions? Okay, again, we're starting to see some of the responses there. It really seems the power sector is the one that people are most concerned about, but transportation definitely close behind. Oops, aviation is starting to build up. Aviation and agriculture also concerns, but certainly power sector looks by far of the most concern in terms of where we risk that lock-in. And then transportation and aviation, I would say, coming close behind. Let a few more people add in their views. Okay. Yep, definitely power sector, the one to most watch out for. Okay, let's go to the third question. So how is your national government doing so far in your perception in incorporating climate smart investments into its COVID-19 recovery efforts? We know that most governments are still in the phase of actually doing the sort of immediate response to COVID-19, but a number are starting to look at the recovery efforts. And as we see those, how green do you think those are? Let's take a look. Ooh, not great results in terms of the perceptions on our participants. Most suggest that it's poor or very poor in terms of climate smart investments. Only a few saying very good. Yeah, I'm afraid this is not looking great. Yep, very much on the very poor to poor. Well, I do have some good news for you. We have a fantastic series of panelists, high-level panelists from around the world today, who will be telling you what they're doing in their governments or their institutions to really deliver a clean and resilient recovery from COVID-19. So we're hoping that by sharing these experiences, we can also inspire others to move towards a clean and green recovery. So hopefully after the panel, you might have different perspectives and we can take some of the results of these discussions into others. So let me start now with asking a few questions to our distinguished panelists. I'd like to turn first to our first speaker, Lord Goldsmith with the United Kingdom. Minister, I find this to be a fascinating moment for the United Kingdom as well as the world. A very challenging time, but also great opportunities. there's three numbers that really strike me about the UK at the moment. 138, and 69. So one year ago, your country became the first major economy to set into law a goal to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Thank you. And of course, now we're seeing many other countries and companies and investors following in your footsteps. So it's wonderful to see. 138. So 138 years ago, in 1882, the world's first coal-fired power station was built in the UK. Now the country is leading the charge in kicking the habit of coal, with Britain going months at a time without burning coal to generate power. So you've really shifted quickly off of coal in recent months and years. And then 69, there was a recent poll of UK citizens across the political spectrum, which found that if the government pursued a COVID recovery package, which was focused on high carbon industries, 69% of UK respondents said that this would be a sign that the government has got the wrong priorities. So your citizens are really calling for a clean and resilient recovery. So Minister Goldsmith, the landscape has changed significantly since the UK first agreed to host COP26 due to what we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic. The critical climate talks have of course been postponed, but as incoming leader and president of COP26, can you outline some of the efforts that the UK is taking to ensure an ambitious and successful outcome in 2021 when we have COP26? And how you're going to keep up the drumbeat of momentum in the lead up to COP26. And what efforts is your government taking to ensure a global recovery that is resilient and sustainable? Over to you, Minister Goldsmith. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Helen, for the introduction and for the brilliant framing questions, which are spot on in my view. It's a huge honor to be co-hosting this event, and I hope this finds you all safe and well. As Helen has already said, the COVID crisis has already had an unprecedented impact on the world, and it has brutally exposed so many of our vulnerabilities. And it is undoubtedly a wake-up call, not just in the narrow sense of pandemics. COVID itself is likely a consequence of our abusive relationship with the natural world. But it is just one such consequence, and horrific though it has been for so many people around the world, it is nevertheless dwarfed by other threats. If trends continue, the effects of climate change and the industrial scale environmental degradation that we are engaging in will be many times more traumatic. And the facts are stark. In my lifetime, more or less, populations of animals on average have more than halved. Around 1 million species now face extinction, many within decades, and every minute the world loses roughly 30 football pitches worth of forests. For the first time ever, environmental risks now fill the top 5 places of the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, the IPCC, IPBES, the Global Commission on Adaptation, Professor Das Gupta's review. They all tell the same somber story. We are undermining our very foundations, and it makes as little sense economically as it does ecologically. But as Helen also said, it is also a moment of opportunity. As we recover and rebuild, as we all must, we can make different decisions. We can make wiser decisions. Governments everywhere are currently designing their economic recovery packages, and they can stick with the status quo, bailing out high carbon, environmentally damaging industries and locking in decades of emissions, or they can choose to make environmental sustainability and resilience the lens through which we map out our recovery. Now, in the UK, our Prime Minister has committed to, quote, build back better and build back greener. And through our joint leadership of the Recovering Better for Sustainability workstream of the UN Secretary General's Financing for Development initiative, we will set out plans alongside our partners, the EU, Fiji, Rwanda, to enhance international cooperation to ensure a Paris and SDG-aligned recovery. We'll use our G7 presidency and work with the Italian G20 presidency, both to push for a green and resilient recovery, and to encourage countries to come forward with much stronger nationally determined contributions ahead of COP26. And on that note, I do want to congratulate our co-hosts Jamaica and Rwanda for submitting new ambitious plans, and I hope others will do the same. through our international climate finance, which we've committed now to doubling to 11.6 billion, which is roughly 14 billion US dollars, we've established a Green Recovery Challenge Fund to directly support countries to design their recovery packages in a way that supports a green and resilient recovery. And I can proudly say that a green and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 crisis will be at the heart of our COP26 presidency, running through each of our priority action areas. Now, the UK is committed to reaching a constructive and negotiated outcome at COP26 that concludes the outstanding elements of the Paris rulebook and drives forward collective climate action. And in addition, and supporting this, we've chosen 5 key themes for COP26. And I hope you don't mind me describing them briefly to you now. First, we want to drive international cooperation on clean energy so that countries realize its potential to create jobs, provide cheaper power, and stimulate economic recovery. We want to bring countries, development banks, investors, and civil society together to help countries considering new coal plants access investments in the cleaner alternatives. We will increase innovation in technologies like smart green grids through a second phase of mission innovation. The second theme is making zero-emission vehicles cheaper than petrol and diesel, and speeding up progress on low-carbon transportation to reduce emissions and improve public health. Third, and underpinning all our goals, we need to harness the power of the markets to deliver a rapid transition and to protect nature. We will need to meet and move beyond the current $100 billion target, accelerating the shift in global financial flows. Fourth, we need to help every part of society, and especially the most vulnerable, adapt and become more resilient to the effects of climate change by turning the call for action on adaptation and resilience, which was launched at the UN Climate Action Summit last year, into tangible action on the ground. And then finally, and in my view, most importantly, we need to massively ramp up our efforts to protect and restore natural ecosystems. This current crisis shows what happens when our relationship with nature breaks down. Numerous studies show that biodiversity loss is increasing the risk of infectious and zoonotic diseases like COVID-19. And we know that destruction of nature contributes disproportionately to climate change and poverty. Well over 1 billion people depend on forests, the same forests that we're destroying at an appalling rate. Well over 1 billion people depend on fish as their main source of protein. And we cannot tackle climate change without ramping up our efforts to protect and restore nature. Nature-based solutions to climate change, things like protecting and restoring mangroves, forests, peatlands, and even planting trees to cool our cities. These could provide a third of the cost-effective climate change mitigation we need over the next decade, while also helping communities adapt to become more resilient. But despite that, despite the huge contribution they can make, they attract just 3% of global climate funding, and that makes zero sense. A growing market for the clean technology revolution is emerging, but that is not so for nature. Consider the Amazon and other great rainforests. The whole world depends on them. Yet their value barely registers, worth much more dead than alive. Financial incentives that destroy forests outstrip those in favor of their protection by over 40 to 1. Now, in the UK, we've doubled our climate finance, as I said, to 11.6 billion or 14 billion US dollars, and we will be spending much of that uplift on nature. Under our COP26 presidency, we will build on the foundations laid at the 2019 UN Climate Action Summit and encourage other donor countries to invest far more in nature-based solutions. But the cost of renewing and protecting nature is vastly more than public money can provide. So just as we're doing for carbon, we need to attach a market value to nature recovery and a cost to its destruction. And we need to tackle those perverse incentives. Consider, for example, that the top 50 food-producing countries spend over $700 billion a year in support for often destructive land use. Agriculture causes around 80% of deforestation. Imagine the impact if that support, the $700 billion, was shifted in favor of sustainability. As countries respond to COVID-19, the coming months are crucial for climate and the 2030 agenda. Decisions that we take now are going to have impacts for decades to come. Countries, developed and developing alike, international institutions, donors, and civil society must now work together to show international leadership for a green and resilient recovery that delivers on the promise of the SDGs. Without action, we will simply be banking vast problems for future generations. We have all the tools we need, and working together, it is now time to deploy them. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Minister Goldsmith, and for outlining both the UK's own commitment from the Prime Minister on down to build back better and greener, but also what you are doing internationally. And I think you highlighted a number of incredibly important points there. The 6 key themes that you are focusing on for COP26, all of which can help us to actually build back better from COVID-19. The UK presidency of the G7 next year and working with G20, how you will use that to help ensure there's a green recovery, and UK's own commitment to doubling climate finance to help support other countries on this journey with a particular focus on those nature-based solutions which can help build our resilience to future pandemics, reduce the risks, deliver ecosystem services that are so desperately needed, but also the jobs and income for rural communities who have often been very hard hit. So thank you, Minister Goldsmith. Now I'd like to turn to our second distinguished panelist today, which is Minister Udin, the Honorable Minister, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of Bangladesh. So Minister Udin, in late May, super cyclone Amphan smashed into Bangladesh and India, tragically leaving 14 million people without power and killing over 100 people. Now, while the destruction and deaths were tragic, they could have actually been far worse. Bangladesh has dramatically reduced the deaths from such cyclones over the past 5 decades by scaling up your early warning systems and other adaptation measures. According to research by the Global Commission on Adaptation, investing in early warning systems can save lives and assets worth at least 10 times the costs of these investments. So can you share some of your experience with Bangladesh's efforts to boost resilience to extreme storms driven by climate change? And are there lessons that others can learn from your experiences to also inform how nations can blunt the impacts of pandemics like COVID-19 in the future? Over to you, Minister Udin. Thank you. And Minister Udin, if you could turn on your video and your microphone, that would be fantastic. We can see you. Oh, please go ahead, Minister Udin. Please go ahead, Mr. Udin, and share with us some of Bangladesh's experiences.
Good morning and good evening and good afternoon. Honorable moderator, honorable speaker of the side event, distinguished audience, first of all, I welcome you all on behalf of People's Republic of Bangladesh. Today's topic is on building a clean and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 crisis in support of the climate and sustainable development goal. It is an honor to be the co-host of this event with the United Kingdom in partnership with the World Resource Institute, WRI. The world is facing the greatest health crisis of the century, COVID-19 pandemic. It is very important for us to understand how we can build a sustainable and resilient COVID-19 recovery and how the recovery can be synced with and help advance national climate plans, long-term strategies, and achievement of the SDGs. The COVID-19 and climate crisis are monumental challenges that will have to be addressed for the economic recovery from the COVID-19 crisis to be durable and resilient, return to environmentally destructive investment patterns and activities must be avoided. Climate change and biodiversity loss could cause social and economic damages for larger than those caused by the COVID-19. Recovery packages to be build back better include alignment with long-term emission reduction goals, factoring in resilience to climate impacts, slowing biodiversity loss and increasing circularity of supply chains. Recovery policies need to trigger investment and behavioral changes that will reduce the likelihood of future shocks and increase society's resilience to them. Central to this approach is a focus on well-being and inclusiveness. It is not only getting economies and livelihood back on their feet quickly, but also safeguarding prosperity for the longer term. This means triggering investments and social changes that will both reduce the likelihood of future shocks and improve our resilience to those shocks when they do occur. Whether from disease or environmental degradation, at the heart of this approach is the transition to more inclusive, more resilient societies with net zero GHG emission and much reduced impacts on nature. Other OECD policy briefs examine the role of environmental heat in strengthening resilience to pandemics and COVID-19 and the low carbon transition. A more resilient economy will depend on our capability to shift to sustainable practices. In addition to the immediate human suffering caused by the disease itself, the loss of life and livelihood of millions, the COVID-19 pandemic has also highlighted several key vulnerabilities
Minister Udin?
Yes, perhaps he lost connection due to poor signal.
Okay, we'll wait just a moment to see if he's able to reconnect. If not, we can go back to the minister when he is able to do so.
Inequality. To improve public support,
Yes,
recovery policies need to be emphasizing other elements that improve well-being such as income, job quality, housing, and health is imperative to achieve this, where incentive packages target environmental objective. A focus on people's well-being is also to cement the social and political acceptance of environmental measures. In the perspective of Paris Agreement, the relative importance of various dimensions will likely vary across different country contexts according to other development priorities, infrastructure need, and social circumstances. Key dimension may include aligning recovery measures with long-term objectives for reducing GHG emissions, strengthening resilience to the impacts of the climate change, integrating more ambitious policies to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and restore ecosystem services, including through nature-based solutions, fostering innovation that builds on enduring behavior change, improving resilience of supply chain, including through increased adherence to circular economy principles, actively support development of green finance flows to improve resilience, encouraging longer term and horizon for financial decision. Common to all these dimensions is the need for urgent decision taken today to incorporate a longer term perspective without structural change to our economies. Continued accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will lead to potentially catastrophic further impact, while the economic shutdown has led to some environmental improvements, such as reduced emission of GHG and air pollution and less water pollution. These in themselves will have almost no long-term impact. If economic activity resumes as before, they are likely to be temporary and quickly erased. Indeed, GHG emission rebounded and resumed growth in the aftermath of the recent economic crisis. So we need to take steps towards rebuilding the economy in a manner that will be aligned and sync with our national and international climate plans, long-term strategies, and achievement of the SDGs. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Minister Udin, and for sharing some of the experience of what you've seen there in Bangladesh. You highlighted really the great importance that we take steps to build back better in a way that we reduce the likelihood from future shocks and increase resilience, and that we need to do so in a way where we also achieve greater well-being and inclusiveness for society, including income, jobs and job quality, health, housing, and that we don't take for granted some of the benefits we're seeing now in terms of reduced air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. We need to take steps, investments, and policies that will actually lock these in as we go forward so they don't rebound. Thank you so much, Minister Udin, for your remarks. I'll now move to our next panelist. We have Mr. Ki-Yong Chung, Director General for Climate Change, Energy, Environment, and Scientific Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Republic of Korea. So, Mr. Chung, after the global financial crisis of 2008, South Korea's stimulus package was regarded as being particularly green, with about 69% of spending dedicated to projects that were low carbon or green, such as renewable energy, energy efficiency, and smart grids. Your government has recently announced a Green New Deal as a key strategy to respond to COVID-19 crisis as well. As a member of the G20, this will send a particularly strong message to other big economies and climate vulnerable countries that we can build back better. Can you tell us a bit about the plan in more detail, what Korea is planning to do, how it is being developed, and how you intend to put green growth really at the heart of your COVID recovery? Over to you, Mr. Chung.
Yes, thank you, Madam Moderator. The global pandemic has been a painful reminder of how vulnerable and defenseless human beings are against novel pathogens that may be lurking in the Earth's ecosystem that climate change has greatly damaged. COVID-19 should be taken as nature's warning that it cannot guarantee the future of humanity if we don't reverse the course and start caring for its climate much more vigorously and urgently. To this end, as you rightly recognize, the Korean government recently announced the Korean New Deal, which consists of two main pillars, digitalization and decarbonization. The latter is referred to as the Green New Deal, and it focuses on green innovation and job creation as a strategy for sustainable post-COVID-19 economic recovery. The details of the Green New Deal is still being fleshed out, but the basic premise is clear. We cannot go on with business as usual approach, and we must build back the economy better and greener. We must ensure that short-term recovery measures are aligned with our longer-term ambition to tackle climate change. To provide a glimpse of the Green New Deal, my government has rolled out a series of short-term policies built around the three main pillars: eco-friendly and smart infrastructure, green manufacturing, and low-carbon energy sector. I cannot go into details of all, but I would like to focus on our energy transition. The Korean government is working hard to achieve energy transition through increasing renewable power capacity, phasing out coal-fired fire plants, and promoting low-carbon energy resources. The Korean government has decided to close 10 aging coal-fired power plants. Among these 10, 4 coal power plants were already closed, and another 6 will also be closed gradually by year 2022. While phasing out coal-fired plants, the government has set up goals to generate 20% of electricity out of renewable energy resources by 2030 and up to 35% by 2040. The Korean government proactively set the roadmap for a hydrogen economy and the national roadmap for hydrogen technology development in last year to increase the possibility of utilizing hydrogen as a future energy resource and support hydrogen-related enterprises and research institutes to cooperate with our foreign partners. And just like the pandemic, climate change requires global solidarity in going green. Led by the European Union and the incoming COP presidency, the United Kingdom, global efforts to achieve the critical transition to a 2050 net zero targets are spreading widely and deeply. They must be amplified and made irreversible. Lastly, my government will be hosting the next P4G summit, or Partnering for Green Growth and Global Goal 2030, which is a new global initiative commenced in 2018 with the ambition of becoming the world's leading forum for developing concrete public-private partnership at scale to deliver on the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Although we missed the chance of hosting it this year due to the pandemic, I hope the next year's summit in Seoul will be a timely opportunity to highlight the importance of green leadership in overcoming economic challenges in the aftermath of the pandemic. As we prepare for the summit, Korea will continue to strengthen our green efforts and longer-term ambition so that we can firmly place the next P4G summit as a stepping stone towards a very successful COP26 in Glasgow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chung, both for sharing some of what Korea is starting to think about in terms of the Green New Deal, green innovation and job creation together, how you can achieve that in the economic recovery, but also your international leadership and hosting of the P4G summit next year. As you said, a really important stepping stone to demonstrate green leadership through public-private partnerships in the lead up to COP26. Thank you so much. I will now turn to our next speaker. And as one of our speakers needs to leave a bit early, I'm going to bring up Damilola Ogunbiyi. Damilola is CEO of the Sustainable Energy for All and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General and co-chair of UN Energy. So Damilola, I saw that SE for All recently released a report for African countries that shows how smart, clean energy investments can really help these countries to reset their economies and close gaps in energy access. It cited a statistic that really struck me, that dollar for dollar investments in clean energy can create potentially as much as 3 times the number of jobs compared to the same investments in fossil fuels. Of course, as we look at the economic recovery now, jobs are uppermost in many people's minds. So this is really an important opportunity. You've been such a strong voice on a clean energy transition. So can you tell us a little bit more how renewables and energy transition investments can really help support a global recovery from COVID-19 and pave the way towards an equitable, inclusive, and resilient economy? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me today. And I'm really happy you quoted those figures. Basically, our research has shown that in terms of, green recovery and green jobs, this is the best time. In terms of GDP growth, for every dollar you spend on green energy, you actually get 0.93 cents back. And like you said, in terms of jobs, it's 3.5 times more than your fossil equivalent. So as has been repeatedly been said by several panelists, globally, we need to reset this moment. We have the unique opportunity, once in a generation, to recover better from COVID. But this pandemic has also shown us very effectively that inequalities exist within our societies and come across different countries and regions. So this is the time we actually need to reset. And we have to really consider the developing countries when we do this. According to the new tracking report, there are 789 million people that still don't have access to electricity. Of that, 565 million reside in Africa. So in terms of recovering better, it's important that they recover better in a clean and sustainable way to transition for all. And we already see things like this happening. For example, Nigeria has put as part of their Recover Better strategy that they're removing their fuel subsidy. This would have been unheard of any large oil and gas nation just a few months ago. The global economy is also increasingly being powered by clean energy sources. And the IRENA study also shows that almost everywhere around the world now, it's actually cheaper to provide energy access through renewable means. The issue is just there's still a great inadequacy in terms of the financing and also how to access financing on time for a lot of countries who actually need it. We believe that countries should not only invest in renewables, but they also have to invest in the large assembly facilities that are there to support renewables. In Africa, there has been a kind of supply chain breakdown. with the issues not being able to get things in and out of China, there hasn't actually been enough clean energy to install, which is an issue, but you could also switch that out to be a very big opportunity. Again, we're encouraged by some countries putting in the fact that they want to power 25 million people by solar. And our real goal is to support those countries with technical assistance alongside countries like the UK and other countries. And also in terms of the financing actually needed to really move the needle, the joint venture needed, the innovation needed. And that's basically a key focus of our work over the next few years. It's almost like, let's not miss out on a good crisis and show people that recovering better is actually a green recovery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Damilola. Thank you so much for that and sharing that. I think the numbers that you cited in terms of the potential for jobs, for the return on investments from renewables versus fossil fuels were really striking. This really is the opportunity for a jobs-rich recovery by investing in these. But you also highlighted some of the challenges in terms of getting finance available and accessible and the right timing. So that's one of the challenges we need to tackle. And the other you highlighted, particularly we've seen in Africa, where there's been some supply chain breakdowns, and how can we actually develop local elements to be able to respond to that. So thank you so much for both those comments, and also all the work you're doing through Sustainable Energy for All to really ensure that we do a green recovery that ensures energy access at affordable prices and that is clean. Thank you, Damilola.
Thank you. Let
me move to our next speaker now, if I can. We have Ambassador Rugwabiza joining us, a permanent representative of Rwanda to the UN. It's wonderful that you could join us, Ambassador Rugwabiza. Rwanda was the first African country to submit a more ambitious NDC this year, promising to cut emissions by at least 16% by 2030 compared with business as usual baseline. So I would like to congratulate you and thank you for putting forward a plan that is significantly more ambitious than Rwanda's Paris commitment 5 years ago. And it is a plan that will really offer important opportunities to create jobs and provide development opportunities for your citizens. Thank you. Despite the COVID-19 crisis, the government has set out this clear roadmap to limit emissions and to build resilience to the impacts of climate change, including leadership of the Recovering Better for Sustainability workstream of the UNSG's Financing for Development initiative, alongside the European Union, Fiji, and the UK. So Ambassador Rugwabiza, as a first mover, what advice can you give to other countries in similar situations to ensure they come forward with ambitious, enhanced climate plans this year in 2020? And why was it that your government was willing to agree to enhance ambition, even at this time when we face the global economic and social impacts of the COVID pandemic? Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ellen. And let me first of all, thank you very much for your kind words towards Rwanda. It is really a great pleasure to participate at this event with all co-hosts and panelists. And I think it's highly symbolic that this is the very first event during the high-level political forum, the high-level political forum in 2020. So as we have started the decade of action. Now, to you really your question, it's to us, we have, as you mentioned, we have set really an ambitious goal, Rwanda, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, compared to the baseline business as usual, it is to cut by 38%. And we committed almost an equal amount in mitigation and adaptation. In mitigation of almost $6 billion, and the same amount for adaptation. Why we did that? It's clear to us that to manage COVID-19 required immediate action. And this is what is happening in all countries. But so does climate action. We can't afford to delay climate action. And we have, with this pandemic, a unique opportunity to harness the COVID-19 response to refocus our socio-economic development towards real resilience and sustainability. Now, why we did it, why we almost had a countersensical reaction in Rwanda, is that we have registered a significant loss of life caused by climate action and extreme weather events, floods, landslides, this year alone. And if we look at the loss of life starting the beginning of this year due to climate change, it has been way higher than the loss of life due to COVID-19. So these disasters have also led to a tremendous negative impact, I mean, destruction of infrastructure. They have caused significant economic losses in communities, in the country at large. It is actually this devastating loss of life that has kept climate change front and center of Rwanda policy agenda. And I believe that will be our advice to all other countries, is that unfortunately, the loss of life and the economic loss to climate action is less visible than the loss due to COVID-19. Out of top of my mind, top of any country, if you ask them how many lives have been lost to COVID-19 in their country, they will tell you with preciseness, exactly, because those are monitored on a daily basis. But if you ask them how many lives they have lost to climate disasters, what has been the impact on the economy, well, the data is less clear because it's less closely monitored. So people have the sense also that when it comes to climate disaster, that it is basically natural death or natural losses and destructions, and nothing is less natural. It's actually the consequence of emissions, increasing emissions, and lack of action over time. So that's really what I would say has really prompted us to act so quickly. And we must work together with the same spirit of global cooperation, the same urgency that we have seen in addressing COVID-19, if we are really to achieve what we have committed ourselves to in the Paris Agreement, in the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, the SDGs, and more importantly, if we really to recover in a more resilient and sustainable way. And this will happen only if we reduce the emissions. Now, reducing the emissions and our commitment, we will stick to our commitment, we will do the necessary investment, we count on partnership from other countries, but also from private sector to be able to implement. And partnership comes in many ways, technologically and financially. But then that will not have the impact, the desired impact in Rwanda, if we don't have a critical mass of countries doing exactly the same and taking the same commitment. So let me just say very briefly some of the actions that we have undertaken in Rwanda. Some of the priority interventions on our side include air pollution control, air quality monitoring to avoid rebound effects. They include also effective medical and hazardous waste management, investment in digital infrastructure, because we have seen that with the COVID-19, we have moved to remote working overnight. We are developing also more sustainable models for production in agriculture, mining, industry at large, and energy transition. It was wonderful to listen to Damilola. We are working very closely with Sustainable Energy for All, really just towards renewables and energy transition. We have established a COVID-19 Economic Recovery Fund, which is really aligned towards our green growth and climate resilience strategy as well as our NDC's climate action plan. So we see the recovery as an opportunity to really further green. We opted for a green growth, but we see the recovery as an opportunity to further green our economic growth and avoid the type of short-term responses that are a temptation, but they could exacerbate climate action. So that's why both the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, and the Rwanda Green Growth, they are coordinating, all of them and all of us together, a government-wide process to mobilize resources for these NDCs and other green growth recovery. So this is what I can share with you at this stage. I'll be more than happy to come back later to contribute to responses. But this is to say that, well, it is not an either or. We are not in a situation of an either or when it comes to recovery from COVID-19 and climate action. We simply, instead, investing in climate action is an accelerator to recovery from COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rugwabiza. As you said, it's not an either or, it's actually investing in climate action is the accelerator to a recovery, a strong recovery from COVID-19. You also stressed how little information we have, but how unfortunately large the number of deaths and impacts are from climate change and climate change related disasters. We're tracking closely on COVID-19, but not so closely on the climate related disasters. So many countries, many political leaders are not as aware of these, but they are enormous and something that needs to be tackled. And thank you so much in terms of what you emphasized, in terms of what is happening there in Rwanda. In terms of your recovery, I think the collaboration you have between the Minister of Environment, Minister of Finance and Minister of Planning to really ensure that you can do sustainable agriculture, sustainable mining and the energy transition is a great example for other countries to learn from how you can step up climate ambition at this moment as an accelerator to the recovery. Thank you so much, Ambassador Rugwabiza. Now let me turn to our final panelist, and I would like to just remind everyone to submit any questions you have for the panelists through the Q&A function. We will be picking those up and passing some of those back to the panelists. So please do put your questions in. But first, I would like to turn to Ambassador E. Courtney Rattray, Permanent Representative of Jamaica to the UN. Ambassador Rattray, last week, Jamaica submitted its updated and enhanced NDC for climate action to the UNFCCC. Jamaica is the first country in North America or the Caribbean to submit an updated national climate plan. So thank you as well for your incredible leadership on this. Can you briefly outline the action your country will be taking to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions and to build resilience to future climate shocks? And can you share any best practices you think would be relevant for other countries? And finally, as a small island developing state vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, what efforts can the international community take by COP26 to help secure your country's sustainable development and economic security, as well as that of other small island development states? Over to you, Ambassador.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Helen. And just want to say thank you as well to all the co-organizers, Bangladesh, Rwanda, ROK, UK, WRI, SE for all. Thank you very much. It's nice to collaborate with you. It's certainly a pleasure for me to share Jamaica's experience on the timely matter of climate action in the era of COVID-19 and beyond. Our updated and enhanced NDC reflects a commitment to establishing a low carbon economic pathway on our journey to ensuring our sustainable development. Our strategy includes making deeper emissions reductions in the energy sector. In doing so, we will continue to diversify our energy matrix to decrease our dependence on carbon-intensive fuels. The updated NDC will reduce emissions by 25% by 2030, benchmarked against a business-as-usual baseline. In relative terms, this represents an increase of ambition by 60% compared to our previous submission in 2015. We have also improved our NDCs in comparison with our first one, that one that I mentioned in 2015, by expanding the sectoral scope to go beyond just the energy sector and to address land use and forestry emissions. Our strategy for each cycle of NDC update will be to include ever more sectors, all grounded in careful analysis of policy options, projects, and programs. We are also pursuing greater energy efficiency in the water sector to reduce waste and consumption and limit our vulnerability to water shortage. We are complementing these actions by making greater use of climate-smart agricultural techniques and watershed restoration. With respect to best practices, we used the momentum generated by the Secretary General's Climate Action Summit last September to solidify partnerships and advance the review we had already started of our NDCs. It is critical for us to ensure that our national climate plan is anchored in existing national policies and measures. This, in our view, will ensure that it is practical and credible. It also sets the tone for the type of multi-sector collaboration and close coordination that is necessary for us to achieve our targets. So as we move towards implementation, we are looking for partners with which to collaborate. For example, we have partnered with the World Bank to conduct the sectoral assessments and modeling that resulted in the enhanced targets that we have today. Jamaica has an ongoing collaboration with the NDC partnership, which has helped with the coordination and response we have received from other international partners such as UNDP, UNFCCC, the Climate Technology Center and Network, that is CTCN, which is, I don't know, you may know it's the operational arm of the UNFCCC technology mechanism, and it's hosted by UN Environment. We also have partnerships with the Commonwealth Secretariat and several other organizations, such as the Rocky Mountain Institute and the Greenhouse Management Institute. I should mention that we are also a country champion for the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. I don't know how many of the audience, and I really am grateful for the participation of all those who have tuned in with us today, but I don't know how many of you know about the Finance Ministers for Climate Action, that coalition, which is spearheaded by Finland and Chile. But it recognizes the challenges posed by climate change and the unique capacity of the world's finance ministers to address them, and the ways in which these efforts could be strengthened through collective engagement. Through the coalition, we are moving to forge greater participation of our Ministry of Finance in the NDC review and implementation process. This is especially necessary now as we deal with the impacts of the pandemic. As we look towards COP26, Jamaica encourages the international community to take a more analytical look into the COVID-19 recovery plans of individual countries. We believe the creation of special windows or programs, initiatives to support their efforts by ensuring alignment with the SDGs and their enhanced NDCs is essential. We also urge the international community to create more partnerships with the private sector to help mobilize investments for critical sectors to build back better and increase resiliency of our energy sector, buildings and construction, food systems, waste management systems, sustainable tourism and agriculture. On a closing note, it would be remiss of me as co-chair of the group of friends of SDG financing not to raise the matter of climate financing. Climate finance remains insufficient. And you heard Damilola say that earlier. It is critical for countries, finance that is critical for countries to manage and recover from the pandemic. The climate finance conversation therefore needs to be at the center of COP26, and progress needs to happen in the negotiations towards the provision of long-term finance. We now more than ever need support to effectively translate our NDCs into investment plans, quantify needs based on the current situation of the economy, and work on making climate finance more flexible and more accessible. Lastly, we continue to urge developed countries to submit ambitious and enhanced NDCs to ensure that climate action remains at the center of the global economic recovery. And, you know, just Helen, to just go back to the importance of climate finance for 1 second, I do want to commend Minister Zach Goldsmith of the United Kingdom for what he said this morning, which is that the UK has doubled its climate finance and will invest most of this in nature-based solutions. I think that is critically important. And so we are urging other developed countries to meet these obligations and to take the lead that the United Kingdom is showing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rattray, both for sharing the leadership that Jamaica has shown in actually tackling climate change and enhancing the ambition this year for your climate commitments, but also your great leadership on the agenda of financing climate action and the SDGs. As you said, this is an absolutely critical issue, particularly in the lead up to COP26. We've already seen wonderful leadership from the UK themselves, but how we can get other countries to step up to the plate on climate finance and to ensure this helps contribute to a green, inclusive and sustainable recovery will be essential in this lead up to the COP26 discussions. Thank you also for highlighting the importance of the role of ministers of finance in helping to engage in the agenda for enhancing ambition on climate and the SDGs, and for your own role in Jamaica as part of the coalition of the finance ministers for climate action. Thank you so much for that. Now, thank you, huge thanks to all of our panelists for the initial discussion. It was great to hear your views and how in your countries or institutions we're actually moving forward proactively with a clean and resilient recovery. We now have a few questions that have come through from participants in the Q&A function, and I'd like to pass them back for a round with the different participants. There's two questions that have really been posed to all participants, and then a couple for specific ones. So what I'll do is read out the two for all participants and then go through our list of speakers to respond to those, and as relevant, add some for specific speakers. So the two questions for everyone to answer. The first one comes from a youth activist who highlighted that while the energy transition and green recovery can create more jobs, there's a risk that some of these jobs are generated in the formal sector, but not the informal sector. Meanwhile, in a number of countries, COVID-19 is hitting informal workers very significantly. So one question is, how can we ensure that the informal sector benefits from a green recovery and that we avoid widening inequalities as we move forward with a green recovery? That's one. Slightly related to this, there was a question saying, you know, in a lot of these discussions, we're talking about the sort of broad impacts or benefits, but we've not done all the number crunching on the actual costs, the impacts, the institutional implications of some of the policy changes being discussed. So it'd be great to hear from some of the speakers how they're doing so in their own countries, really starting to crunch the numbers, understand the benefits in terms of jobs, income, what this means for different groups in society, again, to avoid inequalities. So would love to hear from those. I'll start with Minister Goldsmith, and before passing to you, Minister, there was also a specific question for the UK, really about how you're planning to transform land use and agriculture in the UK in order to ensure we move away from destructive land use and towards more productive and sustainable land use. So if you want to answer those, you know, either of the first two questions that I mentioned for everyone, but also specifically on the UK and the agricultural plans, the extent you can do so, that would be fantastic. Over to you, okay. Minister Goldsmith.
Thank you very much, Helen, and thanks for the question. I'll very quickly do the second one first on agriculture. So we are, as you will know, we have left the European Union. We'll be at the end of the transition stage in a few months' time. At that point, a new system kicks in of land use subsidy. So for decades, we've been part of the Common Agriculture Policy. I think most objective observers would say that it's a flawed subsidy approach. It effectively rewards people for owning farmable land, no matter what they do with the land. We're creating a system which will be the same amount of money, but it will be completely conditional upon landowners delivering a public good. So if landowners, small farmers, big farmers, large estate owners, if they look after biodiversity, if they plant hedgerows, if they plant trees, if they manage land in a way that slows the flow of water in winter or holds more water during the summer, if they do things which are regarded as being in the common good, the public good, they will be paid. If they don't, then they won't be paid. And I think that's the single biggest thing that will change our land use in the UK. And I'm going to combine that with the first question now, because it's not just about how much it's going to cost to deliver this transition. There are huge incentives in the system to take us away from the transition. So I think I mentioned in my speech, if I did, I apologize, but the top 50 food producing countries spend $700 billion a year subsidizing land use. And a lot of that's subsidizing, incentivizing the wrong kind of land use, destructive land use. So we need to move those incentives in the way that we're trying in the UK, changing our subsidy system. We need other countries to do the same. That will deliver far more money than all of the world's aid agencies combined. Similarly, we know that fossil fuels are supported through subsidies to the tune of about £400 billion a year globally, which is twice the amount that renewables get. That's a perverse subsidy taking us in the wrong direction. So we really do need to tackle those incentives. And then the last point I wanted to make, sorry for speaking so long, is that there are so many opportunities in this transition. Any economic transition creates opportunities, but the transition to clean energy, for example, the opportunities are absolutely colossal. So we know, for example, according to Bloomberg, that during the 2010s, in the last 10 years, the levelized cost of solar, onshore and offshore wind, fell by 87%, 62%, and 56% respectively. We also know that you get about 3 times more jobs per investment in renewables than you do in fossil fuels. So the transition is not only economically, it makes sense economically, it will create huge numbers of job opportunities for people right across the sector. So for me, it's now unarguable. It's a no-brainer.
Thank you so much, Minister Goldsmith. Definitely a no-brainer, and wonderful to hear the plans in the UK there in terms of reforming the subsidy scheme so that they really go to those farmers who are contributing to more sustainable solutions. Hopefully, we will also be able to finally tackle successfully the fossil fuel subsidies as well, phase those out now and move towards a cleaner energy system. Thank you so much for that. Let me pass now to our next speaker to see if one of our other panelists would like to answer the questions, both on how we can ensure that we, as we do a green recovery, we actually don't widen inequalities, we actually reduce those and benefit the informal sector and those communities who might risk being left behind. Minister Udin from Bangladesh, or the Secretary Hassan from Bangladesh, would either of you like to share some of your thoughts on what you're doing on this in Bangladesh?
Sir, please unmute your microphone, sir. Unmute your microphone.
Okay.
Minister Udin?
Okay. If not, our Honorable Minister says something, then I can say something on his behalf.
Minister Udin, do you like to say anything, or shall we have Secretary Hassan say a little bit about Bangladesh? I think you're still on mute, Minister Udin.
Could you repeat your question, please? What is our plan to
the question is really about how, sorry, the question is really about how we can ensure that as we do a green recovery, we actually contribute to a more inclusive economy rather than leaving some behind, particularly workers in informal sectors. How can they benefit from the transition to a green recovery?
Okay, the context that we are having, that we are not a polluting country. We are still a agriculture-based country, and we're slowly improving to industrialization, and we have prepared our industry determined contribution. There we have planned to curtail our carbon emission by 5% without assistance from our foreign friends. And if we get assistance from our foreign friends, then we'll curtail it to the scale of 15%. And the third step, in a COVID-induced recession, we are more aware, we are more conscious about the conservation of environment, and we have already, as a developing country, we are the first one that we have created a fund for climate change trust fund, and we are supporting this fund with from our own revenue. So we are not in a position or level that we are making huge huge, what I should say, huge emission of carbon, huge generating so much energy that we are making use of huge carbon emission. So, but we will be in a slower pace to make use of fossil fuel. Will be more aware, and will go for alternative, that is renewable energy. Will be more attentive to produce renewable energy. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much, Secretary. So I understand you'll be using your own trust fund, but also having much more of a focus on renewable energy. Of course, in many cases where we have distributed renewable energy, those are able to provide access at affordable prices more readily for some communities who otherwise might be vulnerable. So I guess that is one way in which in Bangladesh it will be important to ensure that communities that otherwise could be left behind will actually benefit from a green recovery. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Secretary Hassan, for sharing that experience. Thank you. And now I would like to turn to Mr. Chung from the Republic of Korea. Again, Mr. Chung, it'd be great to hear from you how in Korea you're thinking about doing the green recovery in a way which benefits and ensures a more inclusive economy for all in the future, rather than exacerbating inequalities. And there was a specific question also for you about the forest sector and whether the forest sector will be part of the recovery plan in Korea for the Green New Deal. And if so, if you could tell us a little bit about your plans for the forest sector. So over to you, Mr. Chung. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam. Excuse me, Madam Moderator. I'm hardly an expert on the issues just you mentioned, but I did a quick Google search on the forest. But I can also tell you about the inclusiveness that which is part of our plan, which I could sift through the government announcements. So. Well, for our the so-called Korean New Deal package, it is certainly the focus is the inclusive recovery, just as it is green. And so the focus of the Korean government is to help secure the jobs for people. So that is the main focus of the government. How they will deliver it, well, it remains to be seen. The question was also on the informal sector, as the impact of the COVID-19 is felt differently from sector to sector and from different the societal groupings. certainly the informal sector will be impacted more deeply by the COVID-19. And the position that my government is taking is to formalize the informal sector by changing the informal, the part-time workers to be full-time workers. But the downside of it is that it will, there's a very high possibility that the total number of jobs will be reduced by such formalization of the informal sector. So I guess the key is to balance the two. So yes, again, it remains to be seen. When it comes to the forest, according to the search result that I have, the base year is 2008. Korea is producing almost 6 million tons of the CO2, and the forest, which amounts to 6.37 million hectares, captures about 6%, which is 36 million tons of carbon dioxide. And so the carbon, the amount of total carbon is 529 million tons, and the forest sector captures about 3.6 million tons, which is about 6%. And because of the aging tree population, the capturing capacity is dropping over the years. So the plan that the government has, which is led by our Korean Forestry Service, is to transition the forest into younger the trees, and also to increase the capacity to recycle the tree resources, and also to foster the emission trading system focused on the forestry sector, and also to help better the green governance. So there is a master plan that we implemented back in 2015, and we have updated this in 2018. So definitely forestry sector is part of our climate response measures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chung, and wonderful to hear that. I know Korea has been a real leader on restoring degraded forest lands in the past, which created a lot of jobs. It's an example that other countries are looking to follow. So it'll be great to hear more about how forestry might play out in your Green New Deal. And thank you for your comments on the focus of the green recovery in Korea really being strongly about jobs, but also in terms of what the Korean government is doing to shift from informal to formal jobs, but also recognizing some of the challenges therein and the balance. Very good to hear. Let me pass to our last two panelists, both to answer the question, first of all, on how you see the recovery in your countries to be done in a way which is inclusive and is actually addressing inequalities. But also for Ambassador Rugwabiza, I'll start with you from Rwanda. There was also a question about illegal mining, and you mentioned that in Rwanda, part of the recovery is going to focus on the mining sector. Are there lessons you can learn on how to do sustainable, how you've moved towards sustainable mining that could be relevant for other countries? Over to you, Ambassador Rugwabiza. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those questions. Let me, on the inclusive recovery and the informal sector, first of all, I would like just to emphasize that let's all of us not forget that the informal sector has paid a high price to climate disasters. And many livelihoods were lost actually to climate disasters. So the investments that are going to be made in recovery are actually investments that are also going to produce jobs, jobs which were destroyed. When we have such huge landslides as we have seen in Rwanda, then it is the informal sector in the agriculture sector and in so many other sectors that is suffering the most, in addition to the loss of lives. So that's what just I wanted to emphasize. The second point is that to ensure that there is, first of all, inclusiveness is really at the center, it's a core of our governance system. But to ensure that the green growth will also have at its center inclusiveness, well, it is in the process itself of the NDCs. In the process of the NDCs, local communities have been a key stakeholder in the process of putting together the NDCs. And the implementation of the NDCs will happen also mostly at local community level. So that really is ensuring that there is full inclusiveness. So I would just wanted to make those quick points, and then this is happening in so many sectors. I was happy to listen to our colleague from Korea, because in Rwanda we have actually managed to do a reforestation of more than 30% of our land. So it is actually possible, and that reforestation has come with a number of green growth as well. So it is really possible to do that. Could you kindly just repeat your the question that was specific to Rwanda?
It was just very briefly if there was any lessons you've had from the mining sector and doing a sustainable mining, moving away from illegal mining. If you have any thoughts otherwise.
Oh, yes, well, mining is clearly not my area of expertise, but let me just underline one point, is that for our mining, what we are doing, what we have done right now and we are continuing to do, is to ensure that any really mining clearance or authorization will have to pass the climate, we have to receive the climate tag, really the environment tag. So the environment agencies will have to clear it out. Now, that doesn't clearly prevent illegal mining, but what we are doing in that sense, it's again a matter of incentives. What are the type of incentives that could be provided to local communities and to really people indulging in illegal mining? And the type of incentives that have been provided, it is in terms of jobs. We need to provide them also secure jobs, and those secure jobs in the formal mining sector. So that's all I can say. I realize it's general, but I don't have the specifics on that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ambassador Rugwabiza, and for sharing those experiences. As you say, it's the start of a journey, and reminding us all that it is the informal sector that actually suffer the worst from climate impacts. I know we're running a little bit late. I just want to briefly turn to Ambassador Rattray from Jamaica to just say a few words on what you're thinking about in Jamaica in terms of how to ensure an inclusive recovery. Thank you, Ambassador.
Well, thank you, Helen. I actually think it's a very insightful question that has been posed, you know, really asking us whether the informal sector in all this talk about a green recovery and a transition to clean energy. And, you know, it goes to the heart of the issue of inequality and something that was mentioned by Minister Udin of Bangladesh, which is inclusiveness. I actually see inequality and inclusiveness as different sides of the same coin. And a lot of the time, as we push towards these sorts of transitions, we have to make certain that the people that everybody is equally benefited, and that there is no sector that is left on the wayside as a result of what we're trying to do. I remember some years ago we had this phrase, jobless growth. And it suggested that even though we were achieving our growth targets, there were many people in our populations that were left out. I think when it comes to the green transition, though, that there are overall societal benefits that everybody benefits from. I can think of public health effects. That's quite obvious. It's going to benefit everybody, those in the formal sector and those in the informal sector. Economic growth benefits everybody to the extent that it may allow the government, which would have more tax revenues, to provide the social services and social protection that is needed by those that are on the margins and that are the most vulnerable. And something that my colleague from Rwanda just said, Valentine, it provides manifest benefit as it relates to climate resilience. So when you talk about a green transition, I mean, there are also opportunities for small scale fishers, for example. If you tackle the problem of climate change, obviously climate change is impacted by emissions. And if we have a green transition and are able to lower our emissions, then it will have a salutary impact on stopping climate change. And then for countries that are like Jamaica, small island developing states that rely to an inordinate extent on our seas and our fisheries, a lot of these are carried out by people at the small scale informal level. And so to the extent that you can impact on sea level rise, then you are also impacting on their ability to sustain their livelihoods. So I guess this is a way of saying that there are widespread overall societal benefits that accrue from this transition to clean energy and this transition to a green economy. And as I said, just to encapsulate public health effects, economic growth effects, and climate resilient and emissions reduction effects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rattray, and thank you all. We've reached the end of the event today, and thanks for staying on a few extra minutes. It's been such a great pleasure to hear from representatives of countries around the world, so many distinguished speakers and such an engaged audience, really looking at how we can ensure a job-rich, clean, and much more resilient growth path coming out of COVID-19 as we look to reset our economies, and with nature and climate action really at the heart in a way which delivers those jobs, income benefits, inclusivity as we go forward. Especially a huge thanks to the UK mission to the United Nations, who've done a stellar job in pulling these panelists, these high-level speakers together, representing some of the real leadership we're seeing around the world on a green recovery. So finally, on behalf of myself and all of the co-hosts for this event, thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye and onwards towards a green, clean, inclusive recovery. Thank you.